Over a year since it joined the UN Human Rights Council, the United States is facing a barrage of criticism from member states. Is it an opportunity for Washington to defend its human rights record, or an opportunity for others to shatter the U.S. commitment to international human rights? And is Washington having second thoughts about remaining on the Council? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. The United States has, for the first time, faced the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva over accusations of human rights violations. The Council's first review of the U.S. human rights record was part of a gradual examination of the performance of all 192 UN member states over a 4-year period known as the Universal Periodic Review. Zainab Walji has more.
It was the first time the US participated as a member state at the UN Human Rights Council, and other member states did not waste any opportunity to take aim at Washington.
The Islamic Republic of Iran, while condemning and expressing its deep concern over the situation of human rights and its extensive and systematic violations by the U.S. government at both national and international levels, calls on the U.S. government to implement the following recommendations.
They should put on trial the perpetrators of torture, extrajudicial executions, and other serious violations of human rights committed in Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, and Bagram.
Other countries, including Venezuela, North Korea, Russia, and China, lined up behind Iran and Cuba to point out further stains on the Stars and Stripes. The US was quick to get on the defensive as US Republican Representative Elena Ros-Lehtinen accused what she called rogue regimes of hijacking the platform to attack the US for what she dubbed imaginary violations. But traditional allies of the US, Britain and Australia also waded in, condemning America's use of the death penalty, racial profiling and discrimination against migrant communities. They also demanded the closure of Guantanamo. This all comes amid the backdrop of the release of almost 400,000 WikiLeaks documents last month that showed the US had turned a blind eye to torture in Iraq, bringing into question the behavior of its troops. In response, the legal advisor of the Department of State defended the American military.
No one polices its own military forces more rigorously than the United States. The Defense Department has well-established procedures for reporting detainee abuse and investigates all credible allegations of abuse by U.S. forces.
But having only agreed to join the Human Rights Council last year, this was not the start the U.S. was hoping for. The Bush administration actually voted against the establishment of the UN Human Rights Council in 2006, and Obama has been keen to distance himself from his predecessor.
We take our place in the UPR process with pride in our accomplishments, honesty in facing continuing challenges, and a commitment to using the international system to elevate and advance the protection of human rights at home and abroad.
Washington has sent a large, high-powered team to defend its human rights record before the Council. But no matter how influential they may appear to be, whether they can convince the Council that human rights can be compromised for the sake of national interest remains to be seen. Zainab Walji, Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss this now with our guests. In New York, Scott Horton. He is a New York attorney specializing in human rights law and contributing editor for Harper's Magazine. In Washington, D.C., Niall Gardner, director of the Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. And in Geneva, Christina Finch. She is the government relations director for Amnesty International USA. Welcome to you all. Niall Gardner, this report, in a way, couldn't have come at a worse time for the United States, could it? In an inauspicious time coming on the heels of those revelations contained in the WikiLeaks documents?
Well, firstly, I must say that this whole Universal Periodic Review process in Geneva is an absolute farce, and for the United States to be subjected to this kind of abuse from many of the world's worst human rights violators is frankly farcical. And as Ileana Ros-Lehtinen...
Why is it farcical, though? All 192 member states of the United Nations have to subject themselves to this, including countries like Iceland, Finland, Norway, arguably some of the best human rights record holders in the world. Why shouldn't the US? Are these countries any lesser breed than the United States?
when you have countries like Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, China, North Korea even, subjecting the United States to scrutiny on the US human rights record, that is frankly ridiculous. You even had Sudan lecturing the greatest democracy on the face of the earth over its human rights record. So I would say we have seen some quite disgraceful scenes over the past day or so in Geneva, and why on earth the Obama administration is willing to subject the United States to this kind of humiliation is frankly beyond comprehension.
Christina Finch, you're in Geneva. You've been following this very closely. Is all this talk about the human rights records of some other countries being bad or even worse than the United States anything more than a red herring, trying to distract attention from the key issue here, which is that the United States, as well as other countries, needs to be scrutinized over its human rights record?
Absolutely. The United States shouldn't be exempt from reviewing its human rights record. And I believe that engagement in the Human Rights Council sets a standard for the rest of the world. We should be a leader in promoting human rights and subjecting our own record, as well as the record of other countries, to international scrutiny.
Scott Horton, your thoughts on this? Why is this good enough for some and not for others? Is the United States simply above international law?
Well, the United States has taken a leading role in scrutinizing the human rights performance of other countries around the world. In fact, the Department of State issues a mammoth report every year doing exactly that. It's demonstrated real leadership in this area. And of course, if you're going to open your mouth and criticize the human rights performance of other nations, you have to accept their own criticisms. But I disagree completely with Niall that this is a humiliation. To the contrary, I think if Iran wants to stand up and criticize us, Iran's own record is going to be scrutinized, and it's miserable. The same for North Korea and otherwise. Every person does not speak with an equally effective and weighty voice in this process. And I think the United States has serious problems. It needs to address them. But the United States is a democracy and can and should stand up and speak for itself and defend its position on the international stage.
Niall Gardner, should the United States address serious accusations of ongoing torture?
I think it's very clear that the United States does not condone torture at all in Iraq, and we saw some very powerful statements coming from US military officials over the past couple of weeks or so, categorically stating that US regulations made it clear that US personnel must report all instances of wrongdoing, for example, by Iraqi authorities inside Iraq. There's absolutely no way whatsoever that the United States has been condoning torture inside Iraq. It's not true at all to say the US forces have been engaged in torture inside Iraq. And on the point of Abu Ghraib, where there clearly was wrongdoing, the United States acted swiftly against those responsible and punished them. And this is the difference between a free democratic society like the United States and brutal dictatorial regimes like Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, for example.
In the United States?
Well, I wish Niall's characterizations were true, but they're utterly false. And I think they're against all the evidence here, which is very, very clear. To come back to the WikiLeaks issue, the existence of a fragmentary order was disclosed directing that troops need not report and that there should be no investigation of allegations of torture or actual physical witnessing of torture by Iraqi forces. That's been acknowledged by the Pentagon. It's a square-faced, direct violation of treaty conventions. Moreover, we know that this results from a direct clash between the uniformed military and political figures in the Bush administration. We know that because the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Pace, had an open on-camera debate with Rumsfeld in which he told Rumsfeld that the law plainly required reporting and investigation, and Rumsfeld said no. Rumsfeld overrode the uniformed military. I think what Harold Koh said in your introduction, that the U.S. military has an excellent track record of investigation and enforcement, is correct. That's not the problem here. The problem is policy choices made during the Bush administration. You know, I think the U.S. has got quite a problem on its hands accounting for this. What it needs to do first and foremost is convincingly demonstrate that that Bush-era policy has been reversed. I think the Pentagon's attempting to demonstrate that now.
Christina Finch, your thoughts on this? The State Department legal advisor there, who was just quoted, also said that the U.S. is turning the page on Bush-era practices. Waterboarding may have stopped in Guantanamo Bay after President Obama said it did amount to torture, but there are still significant black holes on there in terms of what goes on in Iraq and Afghanistan. We perhaps know more than we did a few years ago what the military is doing, but do we know what the CIA is or isn't doing in some countries under the cover of the war on terror?
Well, I think that's why Amnesty is calling for accountability. We are calling for closure of Gitmo and accountability measures to take a look at what has happened in the Bush era. This administration has made it very clear that we do not torture. And what we're looking for now is, again, sunlight is the best disinfectant. What we'd like to see is accountability, an end to military trials, and an end to Gitmo and secret prisons.
And is that something we're likely to see anytime soon, Niall Gardner?
You're not going to see Guantanamo close. I don't think even the Obama administration has the appetite to do so. There is tremendous public support for keeping Guantanamo running. This is a prison that has been exceptionally well run, and it's open to tremendous public and international scrutiny, and it's been very effective in protecting the United States. But I don't see any real appetite on the part of the White House at the moment to close Guantanamo. And if it chose to seek that route, it would find tremendous opposition on Capitol Hill and also from the U.S. public as a whole, who have overwhelmingly supported keeping Guantanamo open in numerous opinion polls.
But Scott Horton, is it just about Guantanamo Bay? There's also Bagram, isn't there, where you have hundreds of detainees still believed to be there, and recent interviews by human rights investigators show that some of the former detainees claim to have been tortured after Obama took office.